Slavery is back.
Welcome to a place where private business profit from a captive labour force, yet pennies are spent on medical services to a population in which the Indigenous, the poor and the mentally ill are overrepresented. Where isolation, humiliation and degradation are facts of life. Welcome to prison.
It depends who's telling the story, I suppose. The prisoners would have one view, the people who work in the prison system would have another, and I think it's up to people to decide where the truth is.
Give government propaganda and the media spin doctors the flick. And check out Doin' Time for news, views and tunes on prison issues from Guantanamo Bay to Christmas Island to prisons and detention centres everywhere. Every Monday at 4 p.m. on your community radio 3CR.
We are still fired up and we're still talking about revolution.
Hello and welcome to the Doin' Time show. This is 3CR Community Radio, 855 AM on the dial, streaming live on www.3cr.org.au. It's approximately 4:01 and we're going to be speaking with a number of people this afternoon. This is Marisa and we'll be taking you through until 5 o'clock this evening. First up on the show, we're going to be speaking with Tyrone. He's the Smart Justice Officer at the Federation of Community Legal Centres, and we've invited him to come onto the show to speak about an open letter that was written by the Federation of Community Legal Centres in regards to a very unfortunate occurrence that Corrections has banned penpals within prisons. And we're going to be speaking about communications in Victorian prisons and explaining a little bit about that and what's going on. And we'll also talk about how that's violating just that particular section of the Victorian Charter of Human Rights and Responsibilities 2006, Vic. So, and then after that, before I welcome Tyrone, continuing with the introduction, we're going to be speaking then with Pauline Klagu, and she is a filmmaker and a professor, Associate Professor of Cultural Resilience. But we'll speak about her title in more detail later on, and we'll speak about as well a very special event that's coming up. It's an art project and it's going to be looking at the untold story of Aboriginal women deaths in custody through art. So we'll speak about that and we'll speak about some of the people that were involved, such as Professor Larissa Behrendt and Dr Lou Bennett, and we'll speak about a couple of things in regards to that and talk about the background to the Royal Commission into Aboriginal deaths in custody. So yeah, coming up now, welcome Tyrone to the program.
Hi Marisa, how's it going?
Good, thanks. Yeah, and you?
Yeah, pretty well, thanks.
Good. Now, Tyrone, we were speaking off here about quite a number of topics, but I'm wondering if you could just talk, first of all, a little bit about yourself and your title at the Federation of Community Legal Centres, about what you do.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm the Smart Justice Officer at the Federation of Community Legal Centres. And as part of that role, I support the Smart Justice Coalition. That's a group of more than 60 community legal centres and social service organisations that are committed to transforming the justice system so that it works for the whole community. So I work across advocacy and policy, supporting that program and the general work of the Federation. Fantastic.
And could you just explain to listeners about what's happening with the ban on the penpal program in Victorian prisons?
Yeah, so I suppose at the centre of our campaign is our understanding that when somebody's going through trauma or experiencing loneliness and isolation, having someone to talk to or someone to write to can be a lifeline. And the problem is that given that prison is particularly isolating for people, Corrections Victoria at the moment has banned programs that let people reach out to pen pals to get that form of support when they're going through a difficult time. This isn't just terrible for people's mental health, particularly the LGBTIQ community, but it also stops people from developing the kinds of literacy skills and forging links with people outside of prison that are really important for when people leave prison. And we say that there's a pretty simple solution available to Corrections Victoria that has imposed this ban, and that's that they should reverse it and they should let people participate in penpal programs and communicate freely with people outside of prison.
So why have they banned this very important medium?
Look, it's been difficult to get a very clear explanation from Corrections Victoria about why the ban is in place. And in particular, we haven't been able to come up with a clear answer from them for why they treat penpals differently to other forms of mail. They sometimes make reference to the security of people outside of prison, but what Corrections Victoria doesn't do is explain why penpal letters should be treated differently to other forms of correspondence. And also they don't explain why the existing measures by which vetting processes are applied to mail that comes into prison and goes out of prison aren't good enough for penpal programs if they're good enough for other forms of mail.
Oh, okay. So you mean that Corrections has actually made a distinction so they can have letters from friends and family, right?
Yeah,
but not pen pals.
Yes, and the line is a little bit unclear to some extent. It's unclear to us, for example, how close a friend has to be before they're no longer a pen pal. We also just think that people, perhaps without large networks of friends and family to reach out to, deserve somebody to be able to write to and to speak to just as much as somebody with those family and friend links.
That's incredibly sad, because what does constitute a family indeed? You know, sometimes your friends are your family, and you have a lot of prisoners that have actually lost touch with their family. You've got your stolen generation First Nations people who have lost their families through trauma, intergenerational trauma. How do you actually define what a pen pal is? It could be that you've met, a stranger on a train who you forge a connection with, and you go into prison. You want to write to that person. Isn't this absolutely deplorable, Tyrone?
Yeah, that's exactly right. It has a particular impact on First Nations people in prison, not only because of the reason that you've raised, but also just because they're disproportionately represented in our prison population. And for similar reasons, it's particularly problematic for members of our lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, intersex and queer communities, who also might not have the same access to family links as heterosexual or non-queer members of the community. For those people in particular, prison can be a really isolating and difficult place. It's difficult and isolating for everybody, but it can be particularly tough for a queer person. And having the opportunity to reach out to a queer person or an LGBTIQ person outside of prison can really offer that lifeline to somebody going through a difficult time.
So it's very interesting. So what would they require, like the birth certificates of family to prove that they're not a pen pal? I mean, this just is, it's pretty unbelievable.
It is, and it's pretty difficult to imagine how this type of ban could be enforced in a fair way. It doesn't make much sense as far as we're concerned, and we think the solution is pretty simple. By allowing people to send correspondence to anybody that they choose, and ensuring that within that, any risks that come up are regulated and handled within existing policy. That's a fairer way to enforce a policy that doesn't have the same kinds of harms that this ban does on all members of the prison population.
And how do Victorian Corrections propose to make risk assessments in regards to producing evidence of this kind?
Look, that's not something I'm personally aware of, and something that we would emphasise is that the detail around this policy isn't particularly clear or publicly accountable.
Precisely.
Yeah, it's through a Corrections Victoria internal policy that this ban is enforced. It's not at the level of legislation or something that there's direct accountability for. And we say that when you're taking away people's right to communicate freely, that's really a situation where you need accountability around the policies that you've got in place. And you need to have a good explanation before you take away somebody's right to write a letter to somebody. It shouldn't just be an absolute ban, regardless of the circumstances.
So the Federation of Community Legal Centres has, as part of the strategy to overcome this barrier, has written an open letter, And it's actually quite a comprehensive letter, isn't it? It really details quite a lot, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, there really are quite a number of reasons for opposing the ban and for removing it and protecting people's right to communicate freely. And by contrast, there aren't really many good reasons for maintaining it. And so we have made use of a lot of the evidence available internationally and a lot of the benefits that are available to people for participating in penpal programs. Those are things as extensive as capacity to rehabilitate, to forge links with friendship networks outside of the prison community, and even just to have your basic right to communicate freely respected and to have your dignity respected, whether you're in prison or not.
Yeah, we were speaking just before about risk assessment, and I just think what I meant by that, Tyrone, just so that we can clarify that, I meant that the legislation is already in place to assess that level of risk, and the laws are there already, aren't they? Exactly.
So the Corrections Act actually allows Corrections Victoria officials in prisons relatively broad powers to regulate mail that comes through prisons in situations where, for example, you have a harassing letter or something that's threatening. There's really no reason in that context for a specific and across-the-board ban on all penpal letters. It's in our opinion, it's cruel and unnecessary, and it doesn't make much sense as a matter of policy.
Absolutely, and even in regards to censorship as well, and it says so in the open letter, if I can directly quote from it, that the Corrections Act 1986, Vic, has a specific provisions that confers the right to send and receive other letters uncensored by prison staff.
Yes, that's exactly right. And the Victorian Charter of Human Rights and Responsibilities that you referred to earlier also explicitly protects people's freedom of communication. And that's not a right that's only available to people outside of prison. It's a human right, and it's a right available to the community as a whole. We would suggest that this ban unreasonably limits people's ability to access that right. And it's a right that's protected in the Corrections Act as well. You have a right to send and receive letters, and that should only be subject to reasonable censorship. A policy that says nobody can speak to a pen pal, even if there's no risk that comes out of that communication, that sounds like reasonable. That sounds like unreasonable censorship to us.
So it's saying then that there are some letters that don't have to be censored?
So essentially, the ban at the moment applies to all prison pen pal programs.
Right.
So if you want to participate in a program, you can't access it because those programs aren't allowed. There are a limited number of cases where individuals can apply to the prison to get around the ban, but really that's just not good enough. It shouldn't be a preemptive ban and a policy that stops people from establishing any type of program. It should be a situation where people are allowed to freely communicate, and only where there's an identified risk, then you can step in.
Look, it's really ridiculous. I did highlight the stuff about security just so that the listeners are aware that that's already happening, because often that's an argument that people say, you know, because they often say, oh, well, what about prison security? What about unlawful activity? That's already covered.
It definitely is. And in that context, I think there are just so many benefits that outweigh any potential risk that comes from these programs. I mean, I highlighted before the risks to people's security, to LGBTIQ prisoners' security when they're in prison, maybe with relatively complex mental health problems and trauma, and they don't have the capacity to deal with that by having somebody to reach out to. The safety and security of people in prison is really at stake here. And that's something that a partner organisation of ours, Inside Out, which is a group that works in solidarity with LGBTIQ people in prison, has really stressed to us that participation in a pen pal program is one of the main requests they get from their members. And that's something that we're really keen to see reflected in the policies of Victoria's prisons.
I mean, why does the word pen pal even have to enter into the equation? Why can't people just write to people? You know?
It really should just be like that.
Really?
Yeah.
Do you think?
It doesn't make much sense. And I think whether you're communicating with somebody who you've only met once, or you're communicating with a dear member of your family, the policy should respect that people have human needs to connect with other people, that when you're going through a difficult or a troubling time, you want to write to and you want to speak to somebody about that to help you get through that problem. And sometimes somebody who you've never met before, or who you've met through a course of letters over the past year, can be just as powerful a friend as somebody who you knew before you entered prison.
And as I said, you've also got transgender diverse, and gay people, but also heterosexual people that have been sexually abused, in particular women who've been sexually abused. And they may not wish to have any contact with their family and need people to write to, and sometimes, look, blood doesn't solve everything,
It definitely doesn't. And having access to as many possible forms of support while you're in prison is really crucial. It can be a very tough place for people, and the idea that we would shut off an opportunity to make healing connections for some of the people that you've talked about, women who've experienced violence, our First Nations communities, people who are lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender and intersex, and the queer community, all of these groups have particular needs, but the people in prison in general need to have people to talk to when they're going through a difficult time and when they're experiencing the trauma that is living in prison.
I hope to be doing a separate show about the Victorian Charter of Human Rights and Responsibilities, and Tyrone, I'm certainly not expecting you to discuss the Charter in detail, but I'm wondering if you could just talk a little bit about how it pertains to that. I know we've kind of discussed it generally, but what is the Charter?
I definitely can. So the Charter is basically a legislative enactment of the Victorian Parliament. Only Victoria and ACT in Australia have a Charter of Human Rights. And what it is a reflection or a code that reflects the type of rights and responsibilities that we think every member of the community should share. And I'd say that the most crucial feature of it is that these are universal rights, that everybody should have access to them. And that's why I'm saying, in terms of freedom of communication, that there's no excuse for a policy that takes away people's rights and asks them to justify why they want those rights afterwards. That if these rights are truly universal, like the right to freedom of communication, then it's something that we need to respect, including for prisoners or people experiencing prison.
Absolutely, and to actually quote from the open letter, the Victorian Charter of Human Rights and Responsibilities 2006 Vic protects people's freedom of communication, including through writing. And it goes on to say, and I think this is totally relevant, the ban on pen pals in Victorian prisons unreasonably limits this freedom. It is an unacceptable violation of people's rights to communicate freely where this right is already limited by a number of mechanisms open to Corrections Victoria to ensure both the public and prisoners' safety.
That's exactly right.
Are there any final comments that you wanted to add to this discussion?
Yeah, I would just make two final comments. One is that we'd love it if as many people as possible signed our petition calling for Corrections Victoria to overturn this ban. That petition's available at fclc.org.au/campaigns, and you'll find the petition on that site. And I'd also draw people's attention to an upcoming forum that the Federation is hosting. This forum isn't just about the pen pal issue, it's about criminal justice policy as a whole, and it's an opportunity for the community, and particularly marginalised and targeted and racialised communities, to plan advocacy and campaigning on criminal justice issues. And we're hoping to help shape a strong collective response to the racialised political and media agenda. A media agenda that threatens our progress and that is really important to shape in the lead up to the Victorian election. So that community forum is going to be held on 10th of May from 9 a.m. at the Footscray Community Arts Centre in Footscray. And tickets for that can be purchased, and registration is available again on the Federation of Community Legal Centres website. So that's fclc.org.au.
And sorry, where is it going to be held?
It's at the Footscray Community and Arts Centre.
Okay, and the address?
That's in Footscray, but the specific details will be online on the registration page.
That's okay, and they can always contact the Community Legal Centre the Federation of Community Legal Centres if there's no internet access?
Yeah, definitely. Just give us a call.
Look, thanks so much, Tyrone, for coming onto the program. There's not time to really talk about the other campaigns that the centres are running, but we can certainly have you back and have a look at that sometime.
Definitely, that would be great.
Thank you so much for your time. It was very enlightening, and not only enlightening, but it showed us just how dehumanising the prison system is.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks a lot. And we're going to be putting in a song in a second, but just wanted to back announce that and just say that we just finished speaking with Tyrone, who is a Smart Justice Officer at the Federation of Community Legal Centres, and we're going to be now having a song by Archie Roach called By My Soul. And we're now going to be going on to our next interview, and we're going to be speaking with Pauline about a very, very special event, which, as we both said off air, it's already special even before it's been done. Hello, Pauline. Welcome to the program.
Hi, Marisa. Lovely to be with you.
It's lovely to have you. Now, Pauline, I'm just wondering if you could just on air talk about, say what your title is and also what land you're from.
So I'm a Jaeger woman from the north coast of New South Wales, from the mighty Clarence River. But I live in Gadigal country in Sydney, and I work for UTS. I'm an associate professor and the manager of Indigenous Resilience Research for Jumbana Institute. Fantastic. Which is a huge title.
It is a huge title. And a huge title for a lot of huge projects.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And sometimes, like, it's really interesting because, you know, a lot of the projects that I work with, because of the other researchers that are involved in our area, you know, they work on coronials and they work on bringing children back, and you know, they work on a lot of legal because of Larissa Behrendt and Professor Larissa Behrendt and her expertise. A lot of the researchers are heavily driven by helping to change the legal conversation. And my job, I suppose, is with a mixture of a couple of other different artists and forward thinkers, is about sort of kind of thinking outside the square about how to tell that message to the greater community.
Absolutely. It's so important. So the untold story of Aboriginal women deaths in custody through art. Can you talk about how that project was born? Larissa
Behrendt, you know, Jumbana does a lot of work with coronials on the side in terms of its research, and Larissa had approached us about doing a documentary at one point, and I was saying to her, you know, we were sort of kind of like saying, you know, I don't know if a documentary is the easy way out for this story, and it sort of felt like it needed us to have a communal effort into how to tell this story of Aboriginal women deaths in custody and the rates that are increasing at a rapid rate, as well as incarceration, and how, you know, even though the Royal Commission into Black Deaths in Custody happened back in the early 90s, 91 was all the recommendations came out, there is still not a lot of movement into what those recommendations were and how do we have a conversation, but also still heal these women, you know, obviously died with trauma and a lot of issues, and so how do we deal with telling their story and being respectful of that, as well as trying to get community to be involved and creative within it. And so we came up with a couple of different concepts, and then we started talking about if we just put it all in a cell block, what would that cell block look like? Like if we just had one cell to tell the story. And so we then started talking about the interpretation of rewriting the story of those women before they passed, So there's video attached to it. We wanted to do something that had cultural element, and the Possum Cloak came out of that. You know, when our people are deceased in the olden days, you know, the Possum Cloak was often wrapped around our women and men in New South Wales, and so that was part of the journey of sort of kind of wrapping the women's stories and sending them off in a healing way. And then, we just started thinking about all the other elements, like an eye that, you know, the Indigenous people that were supposed to be looking after them, and how would we use the Royal Commission in the Black Deaths in Custody report to tell that story. And so we've weaved together bits of paper that are a part of the Royal Commission and made it into a mat, a sun mat, and created an eye, and the toilet comes out of the is a paper mache of the recommendations. So just sort of kind of trying to think about, you know, how do we reinterpret the story, and, you know, we can't just have these things be just a piece of paper that sits on a shelf for years, but let's talk about what needs to be done in the future.
Absolutely, and it's really symbolic, isn't it, that visual art, because a lot of the Aboriginal deaths in custody gather dust and are not dealt with on a legal level. Yeah,
and then having someone like Lou Bennett, you know, who's just an amazing songstress, you know, come and do music for it, and Romaine Moreton, who's a beautiful wordsmith, and, you know, myself and Larissa, you know, we're all creative. That's what I love about the group of four of us that have come together to tell this story, is that we're all creatives, we're all academics, but our heart is in the community story and making sure that those voices of those women are being told.
So is that going to be, will those stories be revoiced on a general level, or will there be individual women's stories told?
We've had to sort of kind of, it's quite scary how many of the stories are very similar.
Yeah.
And so we've had to revoice them into a sort of, I suppose, a generic. It's actors telling the story of those women. But we've used elements of the different coroner's reports over the years that we've been researching.
Okay.
So yeah, it's quite. There's obvious currency in people like Mrs. Do from WA that happened just recently in the last couple of years, going back to 88 when some of the deaths in custody were increasing, and now they're starting to go again.
There's Veronica Baxter, isn't there?
Yeah, you'd be surprised. The numbers that we got was around 48 women that have died in custody since the Royal Commission.
So, wow. So there's more women than what... Because our show has covered it generally, and indeed we've covered men and women.
Well, I call it in custody. I suppose in custody means people that are also of care, under state care.
Of course.
So it's not just people that are in custody of the police, I suppose, is the...
No, that's true.
The numbers that we've sort of kind of come up with, yeah.
That is so true. And would it perhaps be useful at this point for listeners, just so that they can get a little bit of an idea, because they wouldn't be, a lot of them wouldn't be educated like us to know. No, I don't mean that they're not educated in school. Like, they're not educated on this topic. And I'm wondering if you could just share with listeners. It doesn't have to be the whole stories because we don't have time, but at least some of the names of the women that have been researched. I mean, you mentioned Miss Dew.
Yeah. Oh gosh.
That's all right.
You put me on the spot. Muriel Binks.
Oh yes.
Need a blanket. There were a few that were name withheld for cultural reasons.
Of course.
the Yarry sisters, Faye and Barbara, from up Queensland way.
Wow. That's okay. Yeah. No, this is good. No, just so that. No.
I should have opened up documents.
Not at all.
Had it ready for you.
I wasn't here to look at it in detail, Pauline. But what you've actually said is really powerful, because just so that listeners can perhaps Google that at a later stage and have a look. Like, you didn't have to open documents, but just so that, when they're looking at going to this project, they can say, all right, well, what happened? Who were some of these women? It's always good to personalise it, isn't it? So you've done a fantastic job in actually giving us some very powerful information. So thanks for that. Yeah.
That's all right.
No, it's really good.
And we're hoping we're staying. The exhibition will be open for 2 weeks at Boomalli, and during that time, I think they're also opening the women's exhibition in the second week of that. So it won't just be the that artwork that will be in the exhibition space at Boomalli and Leichardt, but we're hoping that it will travel. We're hoping that it will create a conversation around the nation, and that it will travel around the country as a part of a dialogue and a conversation about what we need to do about, building communities rather than prisons in this country.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And in fact, really looking at the fact that really it's still about the convict days. It's still about colonisation, isn't it?
Yep. Yeah, and some of that colonisation is now going private, and that's a conversation that, because our incarceration rates are getting higher in the Aboriginal community, especially in female, then we need to have a discussion about making sure that if prison systems are going into privatisation, then what are the steps to make sure that there are cultural support mechanisms for those men and women, or even prevention before that, we had 339 recommendations come out of the Royal Commission back in 91, and they are still relevant today. I mean, when you look at some of the issues within those recommendations over the last couple of months, I've been sitting in it for quite a lot of time, and you sort of kind of sit there going, why can't it just be done? Why has it taken us, almost 30 years to sort of kind of keep banging on the doorsteps of the government when the recommendations are very clearly there? And I think that's one of the things that, in hope that we start to recognise that a lot of people have walked before us, and the wheel is not a new one, hasn't been invented before, it has been invented before, and we're just trying to raise the voice and the issues yet again in this day and age. Absolutely, and I think a lot of the time what tends to happen is you do a project like this, and sometimes it might be stated, but it's too political. Now, that's not too political, I'm afraid. I don't like the way that politics is separated from the personal, because it goes hand in hand. We're talking about women that are dying here. We're talking about recommendations that haven't been upheld. For example, prison being a last resort is one of them, and you've got also the duty of care, isn't it? Yeah. What do you think of that? Oh, look, I think for me, I say that, we can't be silent in the negligence anymore. And I think that's one of the reasons why, as an artist, as a filmmaker, as all of the above, as well as an academic, the four of us are really trying to push the conversation in a different way by using art to tell the story and maybe trigger a different dialogue without it seeming threatening, but allowing people to come into the space and be immersed into the conversation in a different way. I mean, I think that's what we're all trying to do, is find the different conversation. It's really cool. It's really fantastic the way that
the project has involved the making of the traditional possum skin cloak, representing the Aboriginal women who have died since 1987.
Yeah, and it was such a beautiful thing. Like people, community members just turned up at lunchtime and, sat and had something to eat, and then they, grab a possum skin and do a design and start burning on it, and just the chatter of all these women around, sort of kind of just really made you feel like you were, in the midst of Central. We're very much a part of an Aboriginal community at that point, which, you sort of miss, seeing Redfern like that, where there was a lot of, back when I was growing up, used to be a lot of community spirit, and, it's getting gentrified. And so that loveliness of just having all those aunties around and all those young women sort of laughing and telling, sometimes dirty jokes to get through the harshness of the stuff that they were doing was just really lovely. And then, even some of our men that are that work with us, the legal team that work on the coronials, just coming and stitching, the possum skin. I think it was healing for all of our team to sort of feel the warmth of all of the women, that sort of kind of helped to, and the one thing about it, Marisa, was it was amazing that usually it takes around 2 months to make a possum cloak. And we made a possum cloak in 6 days.
Wow.
So,
that's awesome.
Just all these women coming together and the energy and, and that's the sewing as well, which is just phenomenal, that the design and the sewing all happened in that 1 week where we just opened the doors to community to come and sit with us or cut paper or do possum cloak or whatever they felt like they wanted to do, or just sit there and yarn,
But why can't we make that real? Why can't we, for example, wrap a real person that's passed away in a possum cloak? Should be real.
Well, yeah, there'd be legal issues around all of that.
Do you think?
But yes, I'm sure.
I don't know. Like it's a cultural thing.
Yeah.
Well, what are they going to do? There's no
absolutely.
germs.
I mean, and I think that's why we wanted to do one, is to recognise the amount of women that have, and also to come together and sort of kind of see how many women it takes and men it takes to make one of these things,
Yeah. Well, that's pretty powerful.
We're usually all researchers sitting in front of desks for most of the time. So doing this sort of kind of, Indigenous creative stuff, which is part of who we are, is just as important as a part of the process,
Well, it's important. In some ways, it's just as important as the academia, isn't it? If not more.
Absolutely, more, I think.
I think so.
Because it's all a part of that decolonisation narrative,
Well, what's the point of writing policies saying, oh, yes, culturally appropriate activity, if we're not going to put it into practice? There's no point.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and, I think one of the great things about Jumbana and UTS is that there's a lot of people that are doers and sort of kind of try to figure out different ways to create ways for community to use the research in a different way.
That's fantastic. And indeed, 1987 was the year the Royal Commission into Aboriginal Deaths in Custody was announced by the Hawke government, wasn't it?
Yeah. And it took, almost, 5 years. And, I mean, they went into 99 deaths of Aboriginal men and women, deaths in custody around the country as a part of that report. And when it came out, there were 339 recommendations that came from it in 1991. So, and such a important framework of conversation, it helped to trigger, back then ATSIC and a whole lot of, funding and support for different organisations in the lead up to the World Indigenous Peoples Year of the World Indigenous Peoples. And so I think that was it was at a prevalent point to trigger conversation at that time, but then it, since ATSIC's sort of kind of gone down, the recommendations have gone down with it, I think, and that's a shame because there's things that still need to be done as a part of those recommendations that are just basic logic and respect of cultures.
We need to build the movement to stop Aboriginal deaths in custody, indeed.
Absolutely.
And in fact, in the media release that you all put out, it says here the imprisonment rate for Indigenous females increased by 58% between 2000 to 210, as noted by the Law Council of Australia.
Yeah, and just amazing, the fact that our women are increasing at such a substantial amount in terms of imprisonment, but also our young children, the juveniles, the rates are moving up more and more, that 31 more times likely to be incarcerated as a juvenile if you're Indigenous. 31 times more, Wow. we need to start stopping that conversation and starting a new one for our community and say, what are we doing? What are we doing as a community where that is seen as a part of an outcome for you in your future?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the future is, we have to keep the future going, and we need to overcome, ongoing genocide and colonisation and wipe out those convict day policies of young children going to prison at 10 years old.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the project is titled Sorry for Your Loss, and it's an installation piece made up of communal artwork and visual and audio performances. And as you said, it's set within a cell block. And the piece, can you just talk about when it's going to be available and where people can go?
So it's opening during Reconciliation Week at Boomalli at 55 Flood Street, Leichardt. And from the 31st of May to the 10th of June, it's open to the public. So do come on down and have a look and sit with these women's stories. I think it's a part of a dialogue that we're hoping will keep going. We're hoping to do booklets that can help people continue the conversation past just our conversation. And then we've got a panel on the 31st of May as well.
Oh, that's focusing on the numbers of Aboriginal women in custody, yeah?
Yeah, so Chris Caneen, who helped to write, one of the amazing criminologists that helped to write the Royal Commission stuff, will be leading the panel conversation on the next day after the launch.
Fantastic.
So important conversation, for people that were involved in the Royal Commission, to see what they think, needs to be done now.
For sure. And it's really great that the installation piece isn't just made up of artwork and visual stuff, that there'll also be audio performances in case there are some vision impaired people that want to attend.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. And we thought that was important, to make sure that it could also be a space where people could hear the prayer or the song of prayer from Lou, as well as hear the words of these women from before they passed.
Look, that's great. Have you got any final comments to add to that?
No, I think, I just hope that people will come and visit and get engaged with some of the conversations that need to be had about stopping, incarceration levels and death in custody, because it's getting to such a point that we need to have a much needed conversation about where to go from here.
Pauline, thank you so much for coming onto the program. I'm
Thank
afraid
you, Marisa.
we did a bit of an extended interview. I hope you didn't think you were in the hot seat, but really this was just a conversation that you and I were having on air, and it's turned out beautifully, I think.
Always a pleasure.
Thank you so much. Take care.
All right.
Keep up the good work. Okay. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye. And we were speaking just now with Pauline, who was talking about an installation piece and lots of artwork and audio performances as well. And this is happening in Sydney. The installation will be officially launched on the 30th of May during Reconciliation Week, with the exhibition open to the public from the 31st of May to the 10th of June at Boomalli Co-operative, 55 to 59 Flood Street, Leigh, and that's spelt Leichardt in Sydney. And this is about Aboriginal women who have died in custody. There'll also be a panel on the 31st of May focusing on the issue of escalating numbers of Aboriginal women in custody. And yeah, so thank you to Pauline for coming onto the show, and thank you also to Tyrone. And we'll be doing a little bit of an announcement and then saying goodbye after that.
We know you love our 3CR Radical Radio t-shirts, and so do we. They're a bargain at $20 for adults and $15 for kids, and come in black, white, grey and a cool light blue. To nab one of these beauties, drop into the station at 21 Smith Street or order by phoning 9419-8377. Or you can visit us online at 3cr.org.au/shop. Come on, you know you want one.
Come and see Bart Willoughby's album, Resonance, live on June the 2nd at Fitzroy Town Hall. Doors open at 7 p.m. and show starts at 7:30. Featuring all tracks from Bart Willoughby's latest album, Resonance, a combination of reggae, jazz, opera and Middle Eastern music in celebration of Reconciliation Week. Saturday, June the 2nd. Tickets available through ticketyboo.com.au. Early bird community tickets available for 3CR subscribers and City of Yarra residents and workers until May 7th. Check out our Facebook page or website for further details. A 3CR supporter.
And you're back with the Doing Time show. It's approximately 4:51, and just some quick things. The Doing Time show is on podcast now, so if you've missed half the show or if you've missed all of it, nearly all of it, you can actually tune into those podcasts and have a look on the 3CR website. And so, yeah, we're going to be nearing the end of our show pretty soon. And just to remind listeners about the Federation of Community Legal Centres event on the 10th of May, and that's going to be at the Footscray Arts Centre, I believe, and you can Google that or contact the Community Federation of Legal Centres, or you can call 3CR 9419-8377, care of the Doing Time show, and we can give you more information about that. And also a reminder, just a summary of the last interview, that there's going to be in Sydney a very special event telling the untold story of Aboriginal women deaths in custody through art. And just to repeat that information, it's going to be opening during Reconciliation Week, and it'll be opening on the 30th of May, and with the exhibition open to the public from the 31st of May to the 10th of June at Boomalli Co-operative, 55 to 59 Flood Street, Leigh in Sydney. And there'll also be a panel on the 31st of May focusing on the issue of escalating numbers of Aboriginal women in custody. It's approximately 4:53, and we'll be back at the same time every Monday from 4 till 5 p.m. for the Doin' Time show. We're going to be going out pretty soon with our theme song, Black Fella, White Fella. Haven't decided which one I'm going to be putting on. I'll either be putting on the Rumpy Band one or the one by Jim Little. Actually, there is one last thing before I leave, and that is to say that last Monday we had our special memorial anniversary featuring the passing of Ray Jackson, who is a very respected Aboriginal elder and activist. And if people missed that, that's also on podcast, and that's the 24th of April. So I think I'll put the longer version of the Black Fella, White Fella song, and that was by Jim, and that was also one of Ray Jackson's favourite artists. So I'll put that on, and we've got Beyond Zero up next, and it's Goodbye from Marisa. See you next week. Stay tuned.